What a week it has been on the podcast daily. Kicked off with Ohio State winning a national championship. And then reality arrives where you have to come home from claiming a trophy and start dealing with the transfer portal and have contract negotiations with your coaching staff and plan for 2025. What a fun world it is, Berm.
Yeah, it's a shame. Let's call it what it is. It is really unfortunate that teams around the country, and that's obviously we're going to talk about it from an Ohio State perspective right now. But if someone else had won the national championship, they'd be going through the same thing. The way the calendar is set up, the way these NIL deals are set up, the way that the coaching carousel is set up, it's just an absolute quagmire all the time. And Ryan Day and his staff have not even been able to sit down, I don't think, and really celebrate the national championship yet, because as soon as you get into town, you're dealing with rumors about your defensive coordinator and players who are thinking about leaving, players who are demanding money. I mean, it's until the NCAA decides to do something and set some structures in place and allow collective bargaining and basically contracts for these players, like this is going to be an every year chaos. And that's why, like, earlier this week, I said, like, I really hope people understand and appreciate how special it is to just win these, because every year now it seems like it's going to be harder and harder to retain a roster that is championship worthy all the time. So there's might be dips and ebbs and flows, and Ohio State is as good as it gets as in this sport about staying at the top of it. And I have no doubt that they will make the decisions and moves to do that. But when you're on top, everyone's trying to take your pieces.
Yeah, that's true. So it sounds like it's a financial Friday on the podcast daily. He's Jeremy Birmingham. I'm Austin Ward. I don't want that to be the case. It's more like a few things Friday, because we missed it on Thursday. We had a Zach Bourne Blitz on the podcast daily for Thursday. If you missed that one, and here's the thing, all this stuff that's going on with Jim Knowles, or the potential for teams to want to try and go land Carnell Tate and take him off Ohio State's roster. I don't have a prediction for the way that stuff is going to end, because purely from a football perspective, you would think that Ohio State has more to offer on the field, potentially off the field, than just about anybody. So I don't think that there's any point for us to give hourly updates for where it is now or where it could go, right? Like, anyone's going to make their own decision. And if it happens, we'll cover the impact if they stay or if they leave. So do you agree with me? I mean, I don't think that we can really cover it honestly from any other perspective, because the football side, we already know everything would line up in Ohio State's favor. And if agents get involved, or, some off the field factor weighs into somebody's decision, so be it. I don't sit here right now on a Thursday afternoon, like, being able to confidently predict one way or another how it would end, because they're human beings.
Yeah. Anyone who has watched us on the podcast or at Letterman Row before this, or followed any of our written work at Rivals or anywhere else, knows we're not generally into speculation. We don't do a lot of guesswork. There are obvious reasons for a person like Jim Knowles to have these conversations going on. He's the most coveted defensive coordinator in football, in college football. He just won a national championship. He is in his 60s. The guy has had a lot of success, but now he's finally reached the pinnacle, won his first national championship. You don't know what goes into someone's motivations, but we logically can look at it, as you said, from a football standpoint, and it makes zero sense for him to consider anywhere else. When you look, even with all the pieces Ohio State would be losing on defense, if you look at a core that should have Jermaine Matthews and Davison Igbinosun potentially, and Devin Sanchez and Aaron Scott and Bryce West and Caleb Downs, the best player in America.
Really buried the lead on that one.
Sonny Styles, Arvell Reese, CJ Hicks, Kenyatta Jackson. Like, this defense next year, like, it's not going to maybe have a bunch of guys that have played 60 games like this year's group did, but you still have a lot of players that have been in the system for a long time, and guys that should be ready to step in at a place that you just won a national championship that will make you the highest paid defensive or assistant coach in football, almost certainly, when a new contract gets restructured out of this, to go to a place potentially in Oklahoma that you are the co-author of a defense, because Brent Venables is a defensive coach and he runs the defense. I have a tough time. I know Venables probably is selling him on the idea that I'm going to step out of defense. That's just not going to happen. Beyond that, you don't have the pieces there to make the run that you do at Ohio State. And if Oklahoma has another season like they just did, there's a fairly good chance Brett Venables would be fired after next season. And you don't, then all of a sudden you're looking for a job again, because it seems pretty unlikely that you bring in an assistant coach for 1 year and then decide to fire the head coach and promote that guy. Like, that's just not the way it works. So from a football standpoint, as you said, like, it makes no sense to even have the discussion, but we know how agents work. We know that their job is to get their clients more money. And if there's any assistant coach in America who's positioned right now to get more money, even after signing a new contract this past January, it's Jim Knowles. So what it means, and we'll, as you said, we'll certainly monitor it and continue to talk about it and break it down if he does in fact make this surprising move. But the voices in Columbus for the last week and a half have all said the same thing, which is don't believe what you hear. But sometimes in our position, it's like, man, there's a lot of noise over here. There's a lot of noise. And then you hear one side saying, don't worry about it. And they're like, well, the one side saying don't worry about it has a vested interest in not worrying about it. So it is a weird time. It is a weird time.
Yeah. And Jim Knowles specifically should be rewarded for the impact he had at Ohio State. And I don't think that they're going to have any issue enhancing his salary. In the same way you phrased it, that players are demanding money. And I think that might be too harsh. Some of these guys have earned the same right to go renegotiate to stay at Ohio State. It's the way of the world. I know you don't like the fact that tampering is so widespread. Some of the dollar amounts, I would have to agree, are getting a little absurd, especially for relatively unproven players. But I think we got to be careful with some of that language, don't you think? That's too much. Demanding?
No, it is demanding. It's at least, and here's the thing, and you can understand and appreciate every one of these players that's in a position at Ohio State, and because there are no contracts, every year this is going to happen at every school. Players are going to constantly be trying to reassess their standing. Ohio State is coming off a national championship, a roster that every player on the team has heard over and over about $20 million. That's what was spent at Ohio State this year. They're returning like 8 starters. So for the guys that are in position to assume a starting spot that maybe haven't even started before, or some of the guys that have started part-time, those players are in a position where they actually have leverage, where in another year they may not. But because Ohio State is in such a precarious position with the calendar, the Buckeyes can't just afford to let people walk away and say, oh, screw you, we'll just go get someone else, because there is no one else, because the Buckeyes are national champs and their window has been closed to go get other players. So it becomes a very different conversation. And I understand, again, from the agent's perspective and the people that are in charge of these conversations, like, it makes sense to try to get as much as you possibly can. But I think the problem here is that a lot of these agents are not actually agents. They are just people demanding things and saying, well, fine, if you don't give us this, we'll just transfer, we'll go somewhere else. If Ohio State is saying we can't pay you this, I don't think you should expect other schools to say we're glad to pay you this, because the other schools have been doing nothing but complaining for the last year about how much money Ohio State has. Right. That being the case, we also are going to be in a position here where that $20 million, if it's accurate or not, I know that Ross Bjork has somewhat confirmed it at times in his first year as the AD. Like, the price is going up. Like, that's life. You can't go to the store and buy eggs for less than $6. So if you want to start in cornerback, you better be willing to pay $1 million. Like, that. This is the world we're living in. So you are going to be in a position where young guys are going to have to play a whole lot more, and then those players are going to ask for a whole lot more money. Like, it's just such a weird and untenable situation. But the only approach Ohio State has, and any team that wants to be successful at this point, is to say, this is our bottom line. This is what we can give you, and we hope it's enough. Like, do you want to play for Jim Knowles? Do you want to play for Ryan Day? Do you hear the things that these other players who are just leaving have said about these coaches? And it will balance out to the point where everyone's paying this amount, and then the things that used to matter, the relationships, the coaching, the development, those things will matter again because you can get the same money pretty much anywhere. But right now, that's just not the case. And we see schools, Oregon, Texas, et cetera, going after players like Carnell Tate that, and I don't generally want to name names here, but like that is something that's out in the ether. So I figure we can discuss it. But those schools know how much money Ohio State is going to be forced to put into Jeremiah Smith to retain him. And so if you can convince a guy like Carnell Tate, even a player that Ohio State has bent over backwards for and been there through like the worst parts of his life, supporting him and all of the things that should be like, well, maybe I'll take a little less money to stay here for this. Like if you can convince him, hey, third year at Ohio State and you're still going to be behind Jeremiah Smith, oh God, why worry about that? Like, it doesn't matter that Carnell Tate is the third receiver at Ohio State, had more catches than the first receivers at those schools did this year. But that's where we're at.
Well, yeah. I mean, again, from a football perspective, it doesn't make a lot of sense to leave the national champion to go, Oregon in a lot of ways will be starting over. I know this also applies to Ohio State starting over with a new quarterback because Will Howard is gone, but Texas and Oregon are going to be in the same boat. So, if you're looking at those three things and Brian Hartline coaches at one of those schools and not the other two, you traditionally you would think that would be the tipping point and the domino that wins in that conversation. But again, it's why it would be foolish to make a prediction about it, because I don't think that these conversations and the decisions are ultimately purely about the football side. And that's also not new. This has been going on in college football for 100 years. And the slush funds at Oklahoma or McDonald's bags at Tennessee. Like these have been a part of college football for as long as it's existed. It's just that a lot more of it is out in the open, which I think is why you are so much more annoyed about it increasing every single year. And I think it's dumb, but I think there's lots of parts of college football that have been unseemly and complicated and downright silly for the duration that I've covered it. It's just now we see it all and it's like, why are we doing it this way? Can't you just admit that they are employees so that you can make contracts and bring stability to the game? Like, it's not that difficult. Anyway.
No, the answer is not difficult, but the difference is that in the past, we at least had like a veil of amateurism and a veil of rules and ethics and penalties if you were caught cheating. Like there's no enforcement arm of the NCAA anymore. No one cares. No one, and the NCAA is so terrified to get dragged into a courtroom because then everything they've done for the last 100 years will be put on display and people will be like, wow, I can't believe you've ever been able to get away with this. Now every player who's ever picked up a ball deserves to be paid. Like there has to be a middle ground somewhere. There has to be a rule in place that you have to. Otherwise, what's
it's
the point?
Madness. It's chaos.
It's chaos. Cats and dogs.
Yeah,
living together.
So let me put it to you this way: we're starting to look at 2025 and roster management. Deadlines are looming for the transfer portal and the NFL draft. If you could guarantee one player who could leave, and let's just set aside Caleb Downs or Jeremiah Smith. We assume at this point, knock on wood for Ohio State fans, I don't mean to jinx it, of the players that are really in this conversation that you could guarantee one stays at Ohio State, who do you think is the number one player who is the priority?
You're saying we're excluding guys like Jeremiah?
I don't want to. I mean, Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs are. I mean, they're in the same conversation that you have to pay to retain. I'm not suggesting that they have some ironclad contract, but they're obvious. Let's just rule them out and say that's the most important on offense and that's the most important on defense. What piece would be third, I guess?
Well, because obviously Ohio State's already signed its offensive tackles for next year, and those things are done and over with. I don't think there's any real concern about like Luke Montgomery or Austin Saraveld at this point. As crazy as it sounds, I think I might say like Carson Hinsman and Sonny Styles if I could pick one on each side of the ball.
Okay.
I think that we've seen at Ohio State over the last decade plus what stability at center can do for a program. And Carson is now a player that he was an Iron Buckeye this past summer. He's clearly bought in. Every reason in the world that he could have left after last year and didn't. His value, however, is now going to skyrocket. And I think it'll be somewhat ironic that a player who was made famous last December for going on a podcast talking about how Ohio State doesn't pay money to offensive linemen is going to have to be paid some pretty good money to make sure he sticks around. He doesn't have maybe an NFL decision, so that's not weighing into it yet. But he's pretty important. And if you're looking at how do you as a program not have like a dip the way that Michigan did this past year, it's by making sure you have all of your offensive line returning, which Ohio State is obviously replacing its tackles, but they've got those guys in place now with Ethan Anianwa and Philip Daniels. And they need to give Julian Sayin or Tavian St. Clair or Lincoln Keenholz or whoever the quarterback is next year a real base and a real ability to have time to throw the ball, because Jeremiah Smith, Brandon Ennis, et cetera, guys like Mylan Graham, et cetera, are still going to be there. So if you can protect the quarterback, even as the next guy goes through some growing pains and some bumps and bruises along the way, like that is huge. And the apex, as Urban Meyer used to call it, like is the most important piece of this, keeping your team together up the middle. And that's why, to me, Sonny Styles on defense, because he does have an NFL decision, which, it's Friday. His his decision for the NFL has to be made by the end of today. He has proven himself to be a Buckeye through and through. He grew up a Buckeye. Obviously, father is a Buckeye. His brothers is there. But Sonny has an opportunity. Probably, I don't know where he'd be picked in the NFL. Maybe third round, maybe something like that, based on just pure athleticism. But the development still needs to take a step. And he had a great second half to his first year as a linebacker. But he has to be the leader of this team next year, along with Caleb Downs. And so there's an intrinsic value there that I think he getting to learn from Cody Simon this year. I think we've only seen Sonny Styles really start to scratch the surface of his ability. And I think losing him would be just an absolute killer. And the fact is, if he's a third or fourth round pick, the money that Ohio State can and will pay him is certainly on par or more than the NFL would be paying him. And I think that he's a must retain for a number of reasons. Again, he's a kid from Ohio, from Columbus. You think there's no way he'd leave, but like anything's possible. We are in a very unique time.
Yeah. And those, like, there's a different, equation after you win a national championship. Like, you've already accomplished the thing that you ultimately set out to do. Sonny reclassified also for a reason to sort of speed up that clock and maybe get to the NFL ahead of schedule. I think the position change was a different dynamic as well. I don't know what the prediction would be. I agree with you. I think that Sonny is actually the single most important player in this conversation for Ohio State to retain. And I think that he's in a similar spot right now that Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau or Lathan Ransom were a year ago. It's clearly, that the physical traits are there. His recruitment has been followed, and NFL scouts and general managers are aware of what he could do. They saw him. They've been watching him at safety. They've seen him with a year of experience at linebacker and how much better he played at the end of the year. Imagine that with one more year. Now, you can go get paid, but the conversation is not the same from 4 years ago, because you can get paid at Ohio State the same way that you can in the NFL. And I think there is maybe more intrinsic value as well as financial value for Sonny Styles if he comes back and as another Pickerington native or another linebacker, a combination of both of those things, who puts on a block O, and that becomes outside potentially NIL opportunities in addition to what Ohio State can pay. And I always like to factor in, well, what is the next level down if you lose this player? What's the replacement look like? And I think there's a lot to still like at linebacker as James Laurinaitis gets, the recruiting up and rolling for his position group. But Arvell Reese largely, even with the experience of this year, has not been a full-time snap-in, snap-out linebacker. I think Peyton Pierce, I think James Laurinaitis is really excited about the potential that you can bring in there. You look at that next crew, though, Gabe Powers left. I think Sonny has more leverage because of what's going on at linebacker. If you need someone with the knowledge of the defense and the experience to anchor that, and I think he can help himself as well as the Buckeyes at the same time. And then the next tier down is you could flip a coin potentially. You need to keep either Davison Igbinosun or Jermaine Matthews. I don't know that if salary cap wise, if you can do both, I don't know if that's
I don't
possible.
think you can, to be honest.
Yeah, like I don't know if that's feasible, but you can't lose both. Like you need one or the other. And so I think for me, I always just assume I err on the side that Ohio State's offense is going to be fine with Ryan Day and Chip Kelly, and I think that staff is doing a phenomenal job. They have been doing a phenomenal job for a very long time, putting up points and putting together a plan. Like I think that they can continue to do that. The transition is going to happen one way or another at quarterback. I think that might make Lincoln Kienholz a little bit more important. We've mentioned him a few times throughout December and January, and he told us before the Rose Bowl that he, was probably more likely than not going to stick it out to compete through spring. I don't think that Ohio State would be in the ideal spot to go into next year with just Julian Sayin and Tavian St. Clair. Could they navigate that? Sure. I think the preference would be to keep someone with Lincoln's years and knowledge of the system to be a veteran backup rather than having to pay somebody from the outside to come in and supplement that group with two guys who've never played any snaps of consequence. But I still think the priority has to be the linebackers and the corners, and then everything else would probably more likely than not work itself out.
Yeah, and I think the timing of this coming off the national championship adds just a dynamic that you didn't have to consider a year ago, because as you said, the goal when you are a high school senior picking Ohio State is, man, I'm going to go there and I'm going to win the national championship, and you've done it. So now how much does beating Michigan fall into the equation for guys like Sonny and Jermaine, specifically two kids from Ohio? And the question that I think will be interesting to answer at some point for people is, in this new era, in this NIL-driven, fueled world, how much does legacy still matter to people? How much is legacy worth? Like at some point, if you're Jermaine Matthews, a kid from Cincinnati, Ohio, who fought his tail off to get an Ohio State offer, like the idea of going somewhere else for 1 year to make a little bit more money before you go to the NFL just is an insane leap to me. Like it just makes zero sense. And again, but I do understand, like, you have to take a chance and get your money when you can get your money when you're these kids, because this is real life. Like, you never know what happens after this, but there's insurance policies, there's other things that you can do to offset those risks. But what does legacy mean? If you're a kid from Ohio, what does it mean to say, to walk away? Ask Chip Trainum what it means to walk away when there's no discernible difference between what Ohio State's offering you and what someone else is really in the big picture. Mm-hmm. And how your entire legacy changes when you just decide, hey, I'm going to chase a little bit of an extra money to go be the man somewhere else. And that's not the way the world works. Like you also, are where you are.
Yeah. Also, those programs can't actually guarantee that you're going to be the man there, because
that's what I'm saying. Like, they're going to tell you that
you're going to have to compete for a job when you get there. And guess what? You may still get injured. You may still face adversity. And it did not work out for Chip at Kentucky. I mean, we have not spoken to him about that, but it'd be fascinating to. You might, because he's much closer to your residence now. How did this work out? Like, don't you think Chip Kelly might have found a role for someone with your skill set offensively? It's hard to imagine for me that he wouldn't, but I don't mean to sound, and I definitely don't want to pick on Chip Trainum for taking, a financial payday. We all have to face that in our lives, in our careers, and do what's best for us at the moment. But I think it would probably be obvious that he would have preferred to be part of a national title team. But only he can answer that, and maybe we'll talk to him about that at some point down the road. But there's other decisions right now that are more pressing and imminent for Ohio State. It did just turn out to be a financial and a future Friday on the podcast daily. But that's the way it works in college football. It is on to the next one. There will still be a time to celebrate the national champions. It hasn't even been a week since they claimed
that's on Sunday.
It is on Sunday. We will be there in the Horseshoe. Starts at noon. I believe the parking lot opens at 8. The gates to the shoe are going to be open at 10:30. We will be there. I know several of you have asked if you want, and you can track us down. Yeah, we would love to say hello and hear your stories about celebrating, how you celebrated on Monday night as Ohio State won the national title, and what you're doing on Sunday.
America, this is your moment. This is your moment, America. We've talked in the past about 100,000 people at a spring game, etc. There's no reason that Ohio Stadium should not be packed to the brim on Sunday at noon to celebrate this team, to bid them adieu. Guys like Emeka Ibuka, who will be leaving that celebration on Sunday to get on a plane to head to Phoenix, Arizona to start training for the NFL draft. Like, that's all these guys. This is not just their moment to be celebrated. It is their farewell to Columbus. And all these guys, because of the way that the calendars worked out, are probably heading to the stadium with their bags packed and ready to go straight to the airport because they now have to chase their dreams. So go there, show up, give them the celebration they deserve, and pack the horseshoe for one final time before we turn the page to the 2025 season.
You heard it. He said, pack it to the berm. Brim says, pack it to the berm. We'll be there. Looking forward to it. We'll have snap judgments. We'll have, I guess we'll do the Monday podcast daily from there as well. I don't know. We'll figure it out. I did not get to cover the championship celebration in the shoe the last time around. Was on vacation. So this will be a new one for me. It looks like it's going to be pretty cool. A bunch of speakers lined up. I guess all the seniors might have a little moment to fire up the crowd, but we'll see how that transpires. But either way, we'll have full coverage of that on Sunday, and maybe we'll see you there. The challenge has been issued from Berm. He's Berm, and I'm Austin Ward, and this has been a future-looking Friday on the Podcast Daily. We'll talk to you on Sunday.